You could not pull off an operation like 9/11 concurrent with so many drills on that day, mirroring various aspects of the actual 9/11 operation itself, if there were not some element within the American military industrial intelligence power structure involved in the planning of the operation and in its execution. The fact that there were so many warnings led to the early hypothesis called LIHOP, let it happen on purpose. In other words, the American power structure, they argued, had these warnings. They decided to let the operation go forward, to let it happen, so that they could use that as the pretext to project American power into the Middle East and seize all the energy assets there. That's the reasoning. Webster Tarpley at one point, I think, says that there are something like 46 concurrent drills on 9/11, all mirroring aspects of the operation. So in other words, when you get that kind of precision, it's not simply a let it happen on purpose, it's now a made it happen on purpose. It's part of the plan.
Hey everybody, this is the Holy Hand Grenade. Welcome to the show. Taking every thought captive, we assault the boundaries of reality in this quantum game of hide and seek. It's a new perspective of Earth from Earth. This is the Reality Distortion Effect on Take on the World TV.
Amalgam Virgo is hugely important. They're all important, but Amalgam Virgo basically is an operation where hijackers are crashing planes into buildings. And there's another drill where hijackers are crashing planes into the National Reconnaissance Office, our spy satellite office, on 9/11. So the National Reconnaissance Office is evacuated during 9/11 because of the drill. You have other drills around the country where military bases are being closed down to external entry. So in other words, the whole, we go back to President Kennedy and his assassination and the security stripping around him that took place in Dallas.
Yes.
In the case of 9/11, they're stripping security from the entire country at the same time that they're placing all of our nuclear forces on alert.
That's so dangerous.
It's drills like that that are the indicator that level 2 is some rogue network within the American military and intelligence community that has planned and conducted the operation. All right. The third level shows its hand both with the codes business and in the way that they bring the towers down. And please understand very carefully what I'm saying here. There are, to my mind, 4 major hypotheses of the destruction of the Twin Towers. All of them are controlled demolitions hypotheses. The first one is, and the reason I'm getting technical will be apparent in a minute. The first one is controlled standard demolitions, explosives in the building that were there that brought the buildings down. The second hypothesis is the nanothermite hypothesis that Dr. Stephen Jones pointed out in a paper, that there were nanothermite particles in the rubble from the Twin Towers, and therefore the mechanism is nanothermite. Then you have the mini nukes people that point out, no, that can't work because there are hot spots at ground zero for weeks and months after the event, and that can only occur. Plus, you have radioactive components, tritium, strontium, products of nuclear processes that are there in more than natural abundance at ground zero after 9/11, and therefore we've got nuclear weapons, mini nukes of some sort, involved in taking down the towers. And then finally, you have the directed energy hypothesis. Why is this important? Well, first of all, unlike most 9/11 people, I think that there is evidence for a variety of mechanisms being used. And this is where the levels become important. Because standard controlled demolitions would be the most easily accessible technology. You'll notice that as the hypotheses increase in technological sophistication, the circle of those who would have possession of them and know how to use them narrows considerably.
Mm-hmm.
So at any of these levels, you can rule out Muslim terrorists and fundamentalists. Because first of all, in any standard controlled demolitions theory, you have to go in and prep the building.
Good point.
You have to plant the explosives. And there's no evidence that I can tell anywhere in the 9/11 research literature that suggests a bunch of Arabs are going into the Twin Towers and wiring it for destruction.
Yeah.
It's just not there. The problem here then is you've got, with increasing technological sophistication, you're getting a narrower and narrower circle of people that could have pulled it off. All right. Especially with the
so we're going into level 2 here.
You're going into level 2, right. So the controlled demolitions, the nanothermite, and maybe even the mini nukes idea are level 2. All right. And there's evidence for all of these. This is the problem. And with the directed energy hypothesis, the circle narrows even more tightly, because not even the nuclear commanders in the American power structure would have access to this stuff, or even perhaps know that it existed. So in other words, right there with that mechanism, you're pointing the finger at something much deeper than the ordinary hidden command structure of the military-industrial intelligence complex. You're dealing with something that's totally off the books and not accessible to them. You have to, in other words, at that level of mechanism, you have to look at groups that would be researching that kind of technology over a prolonged period of time and have the money to do it. All right. And that's our breakaway civilization idea. Another code name for this global group, whatever it is, this global fascist mafia, whatever you want to call it.
So would you say then that we're going from level 2 now into level 3?
What I'm suggesting is that the evidence itself suggests there's more than one mechanism in play destroying the Twin Towers. And therefore, if you're level 2 and you think, okay, it's all gone smoothly, press the button and bring those babies down. Okay. If that happens, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, they're turning to powder before our very eyes. A controlled demolition isn't going to do that unless you literally pack the whole building full of explosives. All right. So you can rule out controlled demolitions as the mechanism that you see in evidence literally pulverizing the towers as they're coming down. All right. The closest thing that's going to do that is the nanothermite. But the problem there, as I point out in the book, is even though it could do that, again, you'd have to pack the towers so full of the stuff that the activity would have been noticed. It would have taken a long time to prep the building to do that with nanothermite. So what I'm thinking is that particular bit of evidence was salted into the picture to obfuscate the data and the interpretation of what happened. In other words, I think it's a deliberately planted dead end.
Yes.
When you get to the problem of the temperatures of the rubble after the event that persist, and when you get to the theory of exotic energy weaponry of some sort, once you start looking at that stuff, then you're in a very, very different realm altogether, and that's level 3. And it's going to show itself, whether it's mini nukes or exotic energy, it's going to show itself in things like those temperatures, in the radioactive decay, with the directed energy. It's going to show itself in a very different way. Some of the eyewitnesses, as the towers are collapsing, say some very strange things that are, to my mind, indicative of the presence of very, very high energy, energetics on that day, and we can get into that. But at that point, if you're level 2, and you start seeing this and hearing of this evidence, you know there's a third player on the block that you didn't intend to interrupt your operation. And that's when they know they've got a problem. The story was first brought out in the 9/11 literature by a French researcher by the name of Thierry Masson. he was the guy that focused on the Pentagon and the problem of the apparent lack of sufficient debris. And he was also the guy that pointed out that the hole that you see in the initial pictures of the Pentagon simply isn't big enough for a Boeing 777. You know, it's just not.
Definitely, no question.
There's a huge mystery regarding Flight 77. Well, Terry Mason is the guy that first focused on that aspect of the 9/11 narrative and said it's bogus, it's bunk, we're looking at something different. Well, it was Terry Mason that also pointed out that there were these calls to the White House switchboard where they revealed the presence and possession of these codes and then said Air Force One, Angel, in other words, is the code name for it, is next. And it's at that point that you see Bush, while he's in Florida, change from the calm, oh, nothing's really happening, let's finish the little story and go on with our photo op. Somewhere between then and getting back on Air Force One, they realized that they had a real problem, and he scoots to Barksdale and then up to Offutt after having said he was going back to Washington, D.C. So in other words, the story changes. Something happened in that time frame to indicate that they had a real problem, and that he had to get personal presidential control over the command structure of the American military, and particularly the nuclear forces. So there was literally a kind of a coup happening. Now, where did Level 3 get the codes? And, you know, hats off again to the late Michael Rupert, because he was one of the first researchers that found this aspect of the story and zeroed in on the software PROMIS, PROMIS, the prosecutor's information management software system,
right,
that the Reagan administration stole from the Inslaw Company back in 1983 and then modified with backdoors and then proceeded to sell all over the world. And here's the interesting thing, Daniel. When you look at the countries that were giving America warnings about something happening on the week of 9/11, and you look at the countries that this PROMIS software with its modified backdoor was sold to, the list is astonishingly similar.
Oh, really?
It was sold to Canada. Canada's one of the countries warning us. It was sold to Jordan. Jordan's one of the countries warning us. It was sold to Egypt. Egypt's one of the countries warning us. It was sold to Germany. Germany's one of the countries warning us. And they even saw to it that a version was stolen by the Soviet Union. So in other words, what I suspect and what I outlined in the book is when you compare those two lists, the codes are not being accessed like most 9/11 researchers think of by moles, human moles, within the American command structure. The codes are being generated by some sort of very similar PROMIS-based software, and therefore they use those very same backdoors to ride into the systems of the American federal government and get those code names.
Oh, that makes sense.
And incidentally, that's not just a hypothesis, because in 2006, that Chinese espionage case where the Chinese scientist stole nuclear secrets from America, he used the PROMIS software system to gain access to.
Oh, that's it.
Hello and thanks for tuning in today. We'll be looking at how to do a man-in-the-middle attack. I received a lot of questions about doing this video because the presentation that I did, some people wanted to see it in video, so let's look at that. First, we see that Donkey is communicating with Granny normally, but Bad Penguin wants to intercept the traffic, so he's need to do a man-in-the-middle attack. He's going to do this by ARP spoofing Granny first, so he's going to ARP poison Granny by saying that he's Donkey. And what this does is it basically makes all of the traffic Granny tries to send to Donkey go to the Penguin first. Now that only completes half of it. Next, the Bad Penguin needs to now ARP spoof Donkey on the other side to get his traffic coming to him as well. So as a result of that, anything that Granny tries to send to Donkey comes to the Penguin. Anything that Donkey tries to send to Granny comes to the Penguin. And once he's got that done, he's completed the man-in-the-middle attack. Now that's enough for the overview. Let's go ahead and look at it from how to do it perspective.
This is the Serco Group. They run all 7 immigration detention centres in Australia, but they do lots more. In fact, they're probably the biggest company you've never heard of. Governments all around the world outsource to Serco. They run half of London's traffic lights, all of Dublin's, and in Ontario, Canada, they test you for your driver's licence. Serco are also the largest air traffic controllers in the world. They've got 54 towers in the US, and they control Baghdad's air traffic. They even maintain the RAF squadron the Queen flies on. All over the planet, Serco are moving people, from metros in Dubai to buses in Adelaide. And they're good at stopping people from moving too. Serco will soon be the largest operator of private prisons in the UK, and they're very efficient at it. In one prison, they increase capacity by 20% simply by putting beds in the toilets. In another Serco prison, a 14-year-old hanged himself after being assaulted by Serco guards, the UK's youngest ever death in custody. But don't think Serco aren't good with kids. In Bradford, they run all the state schools in the district. Serco is the model of a modern multinational, and that's why they're the right company to keep us safe. They've been running the UK's ballistic missile defence system ever since it was outsourced 40 years ago. In fact, they look after Britain's entire nuclear arsenal, from creation to decommissioning. But wait, there's more. Serco are so good at running things, they even run time itself. That's right, Serco have the contract for setting Greenwich Mean Time. And Serco just keep getting bigger. Since 1994, they've grown by 1,200%. How have they been so successful? CEO Chris Hyman puts his success with Serco down to listening to God. Now, you might think things like nuclear arsenals and border protection are best handled by the government, but that's not a problem for Serco because about 85% of their workforce are ex-public servants, so they have all the training and connections necessary to handle big government contracts. In Australia, Serco have a presence on every military base, run every immigration detention centre, 2 prisons, cross-country trains like the Indian Pacific and the GAN, and they're bidding on more contracts right now, including one to run prisons across New South Wales. So, even if you don't know their name, chances are you're caught in their web. Serco, bringing service to life.
Well, I'd like to focus on this Operation Hawk Hills in Yorkshire. And this is a long-term establishment, essentially controlled by the Ministry of Defence in the UK, but more probably by GCHQ and the Intelligence Service. And this is a place where Serco provides the most extraordinary service to its prime client, which is the United Kingdom Cabinet Office, called Resilience or Emergency Preparedness College. And what they'll do is Serco will tell the client, which could actually be the state of New York or the city of Washington or whatever, that if you lend us your communications network, we will provide you with resilience training by inserting essentially fake news or media plays into your network, providing TV journalists to interview public servants and make sure that the public servants communicate in a manner that doesn't panic the public, even if the public needs to be panicked, to actually do something constructive about what's going on. So on 911, I don't say the public needed to be panicked, but the public needed to be told on 911 that there was a continuity of government exercise going on in Washington and New York that had been switched from simulation to live fire through a patent generated for the interactive training of AWACS weapons directors. So on your collage, you've got that wonderful image of the Boeing AWACS up in the skies above the World Trade Center on 911. And of course, that's got the NATO insignia on it because it's a NATO AWACS. I believe there have been about 70 AWACS sold around the world. And if, for example, the patented signals intelligence technology on that aircraft had been backdoored, perhaps because an ethical hacker wasn't a very smart hacker, you've got a huge problem because you could have what is known as friend or foe switching right in the middle of an exercise. And so there's a patent that's been taken out by the late Jerome Lemelson for friend or foe swapping or identification. And that's very alarming because it's also, he took out a patent for prisoner tracking and parolee tracking, where AI expert system or fuzzy logic algorithms to reward or punish a prisoner depending on whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Effectively on 911, it's my opinion, there's another plane in the skies over the other side from the AWACS, which is a JPATS aircraft, or a Con-Air aircraft, where JPAT stands for Justice, Prisoner and Alien Transportation System. And that airline system was launched by Christine Marcy, right, who is the sister of Field McConnell, who rang Field McConnell in December of 1988, asking him as a pilot with some 20, well, he didn't have that level of experience back then, I guess, but a very experienced military and civil jet aircraft pilot, what she should do in the event of a prisoner mutiny, because the airlines didn't like shackling the prisoners to the seats. Right. What Field McConnell, my former colleague at Able Danger, told her, or what he told me he told her, was, well, drone the aircraft, you stupid. Well, whatever it was he called her at the time. He doesn't hold her in very high regard, which can be evidenced by looking at the Able Danger comments he's made about her over the years. Anyway, I believe she went away and droned the aircraft, and she had a lot of money available to do that because she had also launched in 1984 the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which she ran with Eric Holder, where you could stop a guy driving a Lamborghini in New York on the suspicion he didn't have the means to support the purchase of the Lamborghini, confiscate the Lamborghini, he can sue you to get it back, and the forces around Christine Marcy, including the Department of Justice Detention and Deportation Program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, could then sell off the Lamborghini and pocket the proceeds and use them to finance any particular escapade that Christine Marcy found worthwhile. Now, Christine Marcy did some interesting things because she set up the ADX Florence jail system and stored some very interesting so-called terrorists. I would suggest they're basically criminals or patsies. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, or alleged Unabomber, Ramzi Youssef, who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993 using 100 pounds of atomized aluminum powder as a booster, and Timothy McVeigh, the alleged bomber of the building in Oklahoma City, the Murrah building, where these vermin placed, and I'm sure she knows exactly why and what, but it apparently they placed a bomb under the daycare center to maximize carnage amongst the little ones, because that's what they like to do. Anyway, it appears that she flew Timothy McVeigh to his execution in 2001, and I'm suggesting that's because he was potentially a whistleblower for the attack of 911. But so back to
well, he certainly knew a lot of details about the bombing of the Murrah building and what the we've heard from Cody Snodgrass, David, that Timothy McVeigh's truck bomb was actually an umbrella op. It was the publicly exposed aspect of the operation meant to cover a more deadly bomb that was underneath the building. So that was sort of like a fake cover.
Yes, and so that notion, of course, is back to tunneling. What's happened with the intelligence systems or operations in the United States, they've created a morass of confusion. I believe there's 18 intelligence agencies falling over themselves in the United States. Well, how can you possibly extract a meaningful or actionable intelligence and present it into a form to a man as, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, as challenged as President Donald Trump, because you've got an attention deficit issue there. He's a very smart, cunning guy, But at the end of the day, if you have 18 intelligence groups telling you which way to go, you can't go anywhere without getting deeper into what he would describe as a swamp. But back to Hawk Hills. So Hawk Hills is operated by Serco, and Serco operates the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the National Visa Center, the Defense Red Switch Network, the Defense Ammunition Center, and basically the British company Serco, which has been charged but not convicted of fraud in respect to the transport of prisoners around the world.
Why not convicted?
Actually, because they were cleared by a dirty police force in England. So this fraud was a statement that Serco was charging taxpayers for prisoners to be delivered to either court or trial when the prisoners were either dead, back in jail, overseas, or had never been in prison before. I believe Serco paid a fine. Christopher Hyman, the chief executive officer, resigned in 2014, but that didn't do the victims of 9/11 any good, because Christopher Hyman was in the North Tower on the morning of 9/11, attending a breakfast meeting of the Risk Waters Group at the Windows of the World restaurant. He gets up at 8:30 in the morning, goes into an elevator down to the 47th floor, and meets with Serco shareholders in, I believe, what had been constructed as a Deadpool. That is to say, the Serco shareholders, they may not have understood what they were going into, but when they assembled on the 47th floor, I think they were told, you got an opportunity to bet on body counts and times of death for any of the service groups or professional groups in the World Trade Center. So I think they were placing bets on the number of dead firefighters, which turned out to be 343, when both towers collapsed around the firefighters' ears and their radio systems were jammed, so they didn't get the order to evacuate. Right? So a crime of incredible brutality and cynicism, consistent, I think, with the values system of these white list of elite teachers or evil teachers, which in your collage are shown as John Deutsch, who is a professor, I think, of chemistry at MIT. He was the director of the CIA in 1995, and he was fired by Clinton, and I'll repeat it, even though it may not be of me who heard that. To be fired by Bill Clinton, you've got to be seriously evil.
Yeah.
Right? And what this done is it allowed, I think, 14,000 pages of top secret CIA information, naming a whole bunch of agents around the world, to be transferred to the custody of,
his
I
house.
think it was a female house.
Yeah.
His house helper, a woman who was working in his home, and I think she was a British agent. Right? So the CIA has been compromised for years. And in fact, the CIA is a creature of British intelligence, because Victor Rothschild was in Paris at the end of World War II, negotiating the transformation of the OSS into the CIA. And the OSS was the creature of the Special Operation Executives, which was set up by Winston Churchill and Victor Rothschild, to set Europe on fire towards the end of World War II. So John Deutsch is a traitor and a scumbag, and that's just for starters, but he is on the faculty, or was on the faculty of chemistry at MIT. You've got the underground criminal group leaders, Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers. Bernardine Dawn was on faculty for decades at Northwestern University. Bill Ayers on faculty at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where the electronic visualization laboratory is. You've got Michelle Obama, who was the Vice President of Community Affairs for the University of Chicago Hospitals, on $315,000 a year, and an avid promoter of late-term abortion. And you've got Barack Hussein Obama, who worked in BIC in New York in 1984 on leverage, lease, and currency swaps, lecturing at the University of Chicago on what looks to me on procedures to liquidate American corporations, utilities, and
both
banks.
Political parties.
No. Or political parties, right. So what you've got with this group is an exceedingly corrupt and dangerous and treasonous group. Bill Clinton sent John Shalikashvili, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in 1997 to address the People's Liberation Army University in Beijing, where Shalikashvili, the son of a Waffen-SS major who got into the United States through the British Operation Paperclip. So Shalikashvili, I think, was 6 years old when he came into the United States, into Illinois. He was the first non-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That may not be very smart, really. Anyway, because of the divided loyalty issue. He goes to China, Beijing, gives a presentation to the People's Liberation Army generals, and he says in the transcript, it might have been scrubbed by now, "Before I leave here, I've been instructed by my president," that's President Clinton, "to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs." Well, wake up, America. You're dealing with traitors in your midst, within the gates, right? When Bill Clinton and Shalikashvili resumed their relationship when he came back, I think they should have been put before a military tribunal, except unfortunately one of the members of the Bar Association of the Military Appeals Court, I might not have that name exactly right, is Christine Marcy. So I guess she'd give him a pass, right? Anyway, Shalikashvili comes back, and his next gig is a director of Boeing who forces Boeing to move its headquarters from Washington State to Chicago in readiness, I believe, for the split tunnel attack of 9/11. Over to you, please.
Well, okay, so I'm glad that we've got a moment here because there's so many things that I want to share with you, David. So, most recent, first, I've been Googling around. Whenever you're telling us stuff, I'm frequently Googling around for supportive information, or in the event that something you're saying is incorrect, we'll find something to correct it and update our hypotheses. So this is something I found, U.S. Department of Defense, defense.gov archives, Shalikashvili, U.S., China, share vital interests. This is in 1997. So perhaps the statement is in here. It's got a lot of quotes. He visited China 10 years ago with then Army Chief of Staff John Wickham. Rapid economic growth, massive blah, blah, blah. Deter war. We'll have to look through this document for people to be able to find that quote. But that's interesting. I always like to back up the things that we're talking about. So when you mentioned Christine Marcy, I found this from the Department of Defense website. I was searching for, here we go. Here's, this is talking about, this whole article is basically about Anti-Violent Crime Initiative in May 1996, United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, Criminal Division. This is from the Attorney General. Who was the Attorney General in 1996? It must have been, what's her name?
Janet Reno?
Yeah, probably Janet Reno. So this is Director of the United States Marshal Service. This is Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is now, Homeland Security, basically. Assistant Attorney General, blah, 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 blah. Office of Juvenile and Delinquency, and all that. But anyway, it's got Christine Marcy listed in here just once. I was looking for some information about, these are the contacts, so people can look through this thing as well. And then the other thing is, so here's an article from the Times of London talking about the police clearing Serco of fraud in that prisoner transfer contract. Now, I think a lot of people would read this article and they would go away thinking that the police conducted a lengthy investigation and said that after 16 months, they interviewed Serco employees under caution, which I guess means something in British law about don't lie to us or you'll go to jail, and they found no evidence of any corporate-wide conspiracy or any intention to falsify figures to meet the performance measure. So...
Yeah, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
If you scroll up paragraph above, you'll see that they weren't using Scotland Yard or the Metropolitan Police for Greater London. They were using the City of London Police, right? And that's consistent with my theory that City and Guilds are using dirty fiber, right? Now, dirty fiber is a particular connotation. Optical fiber can be live or alight. That is to say, there's nice colors, floating down the wires or the cables, etc. Or it can be dark fiber, that is unused. But dark fiber can be rented out. So if a client wants particularly precise and powerful encryption or security, it can rent out its private dark fiber line with links back to its cohorts around the world. And one of the guilds or livery companies that I wanted you to consider, Jason, and our listeners, in the operation of that Hawkins operation, is the Worshipful Company of Inn Holders, which is an old name for a hotelier. So you've been telling me that you go to Marriott hotels, for example, and you get very fast service. Well, some of these hotels are being wired with fiber optic cable, right?
Right.
And certain of the hotels might very well have a dark fiber facility for high-value clients or VIPs, where the VIP might decide to temporarily light the dark fiber, if you will, for communications to insiders on the whitelist, let's say, but not want anyone else to know about it. And if those fibers, which would be protected by patented devices, in many cases taken out under the original patents by STC, Standard Telephone and Cables, if those fibers were turned on for criminal purposes, I think it's perfectly for the public to assume that is dirty fiber. It is hiding a criminal organization engaged in racketeering, intimidation, blackmail, extortion, murder for hire, or whatever. And of course, if that is the case, it's extremely unlikely police, as to the fiber networks, will never be able to solve the crimes associated with it. So it comes back to my theory, and I keep arguing that, and I repeat it again and again. These crimes are so structured, with the chain of custody of the evidence and data being broken, we will never be able to prove murder one in the case of murder for hire. What we can do is take these people with custody of the patented devices, like Serco, as de facto custody of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, because it's just processed 4 millionth patent of the 10 millionth patented over the entire history of the of the Patent Office, and take these people to court for wrongful death or claims for wrongful death associated with the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of patented devices in their custody. And going back to your collage, I think those three individuals, Christopher Hyman, former chief executive officer of Serco on 911, who was in the building in the North Tower, Maureen Baginski, who's 25 years with the NSA, who said that 911 was a gift to the NSA because now she could get all the money she wanted, right? And this guy, Roy Gardner, because he's now the chairman of Serco, but he was the managing director of Nortel Europe after Nortel had bought STC and its portfolio of patents associated with fiber optics and pulse code modulation. So those three people would have had the weapons and the opportunity and the motive, quite possibly that a criminal case might ensue, but because the data from the crime scene has been spoliated and removed, and the spin has been planted so vigorously in the mind of the public, it's much more prudent to go after them for the damages associated with wrongful death. In a nutshell, to do an O.J. Simpson on them. Over to you.
Well, the other thing I would point out, David, is that isn't it, I guess we've addressed this in the past, but for Maureen Baginski to look at 9/11 and say, oh, this is a gift because now we're going to get money, I mean, that shows real signs of psychopathy, because for someone to look at that and have their first thought be, oh, my job will be easier now because we'll be better funded, rather than, holy cow, that's horrible, destroying buildings, killing people, changing the psychology of the entire planet. Not to mention, she's a government employee. She would have known the wars and the chaos that would ensue afterwards. For her to say that, it's on par with that type of Hillary Clinton statement, laughing about the death of Gaddafi. It shows no sense of the consequences for these actions, no interest in anything but their own benefit from what is a horrendous situation. I wanted to go back for a second, David, to this whole City of London police and all of that. So let's talk for a second, because I think, you mentioned Scotland Yard, right? And that's separate from the City of London police. It's, I guess, almost like NYPD, and as you go around New York, you'll see NYPD is the standard police force for New York City. If someone calls, for a police officer, that's who you're calling. There's Amtrak police, there's, Metro North police, there's FBI police, there's Department of Homeland Security police. So there's all these different police. And Scotland Yard, I guess, is like a colloquial name for the Metropolitan Police Service of London. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's interesting. Scotland Yard was where the ambassadors from Scotland would stay in the vicinity of the court of St. James. So there were lots of hostels, etc., etc. That's where the police force was grown, the Metropolitan Police. So it's often known as Scotland Yard. But the Scotland Yard remit does not extend into the City of London. So, for example, with the murder of one of the prostitutes in the Whitechapel killings, one of them was found in the City of London, and the Metropolitan Police couldn't go in there because of the jurisdictional issue. The City of London Police is incredibly ancient. In fact, some people say that the City of London Police goes back to Roman times. And there used to be a night police and a day police. And of course, one of their big problems was keeping any kind of control over theft and murders and mayhem in the Pool of London and that sort of thing. So the City of London, for the City of London to clear Serco, which is not registered in the City of London, I think its headquarters are in Hook, for alleged fraud associated with the transport of prisoners outside the City of London is ridiculous, right? They don't have jurisdiction. And to say there is no evidence of the senior people in Serco being aware of this begs the question, well, was there a crime and was there a fraud? Yes, there was a fraud. And basically up to 3,000, dare I say it, AI wizards, or what shall I call it, a magic living object with prisoner connotations, if you will, right, can move over the internet with a fake identity, like that was perfected, I believe, by Michelle Dawn and Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers, because they'd steal the identity from the graves of dead children.
What do you mean?
To stay outside the FBI. Well, they needed a fake identity. So they'd pick up an identity of a child that had died and take that name, use it for themselves. And they moved through, I think they were moving through a faculty network of sympathetic students in university when they were on the run in the 1970s. Well, this clown, she blew up a ladies' washroom in the Pentagon in 1972. I think they got a bomb into the Capitol building. And basically, because they were treated, and I think it's a huge strategic error, one shouldn't treat these people as terrorist organizations. They're criminal organizations using terror as an instrument. Over to you.
I didn't know that about the identities that they had taken. While we were discussing that, David, I was bringing up some more information from this website about the City of London. I mean, that is another one of these kind of names where you say it and the average person thinks you're just talking about London. They don't know that it's two totally different entities. But this red line, not to be confused with the all red line, this defines the City of London that we're talking about. What does this mean, domine nos dirige?
God will direct us, I think, or God directs us. God gives us the orders, right? So the orders from God, then the city of London went out, the greatest empire the world presented, debts, let's say recovery to the guilds or livery companies, which is 100. Oh,
sorry,
okay.
David.
Can you hear me now? 1, 2.
Yep, we hear you now.
Right?
Say again if you could.
Okay. Now, if you're running a great empire and you've got a limited population and you're on a piddly little island, right, you can't afford to send a lot of people to enforce recovery of your debt. So I think the City of London developed a very effective method of debt recovery, which some might call extortion or loan sharking, where they would dispatch members of a given guild. So let's say someone in the world of insurance is not paying off their debts. Well, you go to the worshippers who could merge with the situation in which the insurer lives, or the target insurer lives, who hasn't paid his debts, and they go out there and they organize a hit and they structure it so it looks like somewhere else. The word gets around in these industries, let's say the worshipful company of air pilots and air navigators, that you don't trifle with the City of London. And of course, Boeing, I guess they're slow learners, aren't they? Because you've had Boeing aircraft now taken out of the skies in what is quite obviously some direct or indirect Boeing patent for flight intervention management, which I think was a patent taken out in the 1980s. Or, for example, a patent for interactive training for AWACS weapons directors, where you could have an aircraft controlled by a Boeing AWACS system during an exercise in a friend or foe attack that suddenly switches from foe to friend or friend to foe. And on 911, Captain Gerald DeConto, the duty officer in the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center, realized that the weapons platform heading his way was transmitting friend signal. So he called the Secretary of the Navy, Gordon England, and asked for permission to override the software lock on the missiles on the roof of the Pentagon, because he realized that the missiles had been stood down. And Gordon England stalled on the poor guy, right? And so whatever was that weapons platform, probably a bunker buster missile from Lockheed Martin, went between the eyes of Captain Gerald DeConto, killed 125 people in the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. Not one autopsy, Jason. Right? Yeah. That was a mass murder.
Well, and
right, period. Now,
you mentioned that there was a software lock, and because of a stall, people died. And this causes me to think about another software lock that caused a stall that caused people to die, which is on the Boeing 737 MAX 8. But I digress. The other thing I wanted to point out to you with regard to the City of London, and I didn't know this until right now, there are 33 areas with local authorities responsibilities. So 33 is a number that seems to always come up. It's almost like a coded message, an element of steganography. I'm not a numerologist. I'm not saying this has some mystical power. I'm saying this is, in my view, a number that gets inserted into news articles, websites, whatever it might be, to let readers of that news who are in the know that this is one of our things here, 33.
You know, what's intriguing about this, the city is one of the most fascinating areas, I think, in the world. The Guild Hall, which, as its name implies, is where the guilds pay their dues and they collect their taxes. Down below the Guild Hall, I think that might be a 13th or 14th century building, they found the City of London Colosseum, where the gladiators fought.
What do you mean?
And apparently, amongst those gladiators fighting, this might be quite invigorating for Hillary Clinton, there are female gladiators, right, with big arm muscles. And it would appear that if you wanted to do a hit, you'd go down below the guild, go down to the Colosseum in the days of gladiator fights, and you'd hire a professional killer, right, who would go out and whack someone. And then the Worshipful Company of Inn Holders is very interesting, because that's a livery company that dates back to around 1512. And these were the people in the 16th century who would stage Shakespearean plays, where you have good and bad and evil and tyranny and comedy and all the rest of it. And the people would be looking down from their rooms in the inns, down on Shakespeare's plays. And the actors, and I've always amused myself by thinking, well, since in those days there was no women playing the parts, the girls and the women were played by young men, right? And the young men were taught to fight. If you have a big enough period between Shakespeare Act 1 and 2 and Act 3, when they were on the road as traveling players, you could have a young man of, let's say, 18, very capable of putting a knife between someone's ribs, dressed up as a woman, maybe a laundry woman or whatever. She goes down to the town where there's a merchant who's not paying his bills, and she puts a knife in his guts, and then comes back for Act 3 with a nearly perfect alibi. An alibi almost as good as Bill Clinton's plate alibi,
right,
in Queensland, where he's at the Salsa Bar and Grill, and he signed a plate, Bill Clinton, September the 11th, 2001, underlined 3 times. But interestingly, he would have checked in at the Port Douglas Sheraton Mirage Hotel, I think it is, at around midnight, in which case it would be September the 12th, 2001, which would be consistent with the photograph taken outside the Pentagon, which shows whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, hit it on September the 12th, 2001, which is what the day would be in Queensland, and 1737-19, which would be probably the telemetry signal from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where I used to live for about 3 years, where Serco operates the air traffic control tower. So I believe they injected telemetry signals into hijacked drones on 911.
David, I'm sorry. Can I stop you for a second? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've just brought up this map because you were previously talking about the Guild Hall. And what I notice here from looking at this is this building is labeled as the City of London Corporation. And can you see on the screen share what it is that's right across the street here? The University of Chicago Booth School. Right here.
Oh, gosh.
What do you think of that?
So that's the University of Chicago, where Obama taught his deindustrialization poison, and Cass Sunstein, 27 years promoting the idea that conspiracy theories and other dangerous ideas need to be crushed over the years.
Yeah, and then here's the City of London Police Museum, and then this looks like the Guild Hall right here, I believe. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, David, but sometimes things come up that we need to address. Yes, this is Guild Hall right here. We can see it. It's quite amazing that we have this capability with Google Earth. So we've got the University of Chicago inside, I guess, the City of London square mile, right across the street from the City of London Corporation. That's interesting.
Yeah, totally. And if you look at Northwestern University IT partnerships, you have only 2 cities in that global network, if I recollect. One is Evanston, where Northwestern University is, and the other is Chicago, where presumably the University of Illinois Chicago and the University of Chicago is. So that means those 2 cities, and I would describe them as dirty cities, because I think they've been tunneled by dirty fiber that can be switched from dark fiber on a private basis to a criminal organization engaged in, for example, the attack of 911. Because remember, on 911 in Chicago, you now have the headquarters of Boeing aircraft, right, that has been forced to move from Washington State. You have the headquarters of Baker McKenzie, the law firm that represents the members of the Association of Global Custodians, 10 of which were Serco shareholders, or are Serco shareholders, who met on the 47th floor of the North Tower with over $100 trillion of assets under management, which is not bad if you can get it, together with other groups, which is the Universities Superannuation Scheme of the United Kingdom, which represents the membership, the faculty, with, I believe, £50 billion under management. And the other is Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, which presumably pays part of the retirement benefits of Bill and Hillary Clinton and Barack and Michelle Obama and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn and John Deutsch. And that is the world's largest private pension fund. And what Americans need to ask is, are the teachers in the United States of America and the United Kingdom, not so much are they left-wing or right-wing, are they what Stalin would call useful idiots? That is to say, they're very clever, they're intellectual elite in the words of Rockefeller. Remember, Rockefeller said the world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite. Well, on the 47th floor, I guess you had the world bankers, you had the intellectual elite, these two huge pension funds. And what were they meeting about? I think they were meeting about a Deadpool created wittingly or unwittingly by Roy Gardner, the present chairman of Serco. Over to you.
So let's just clarify for everybody. Roy Gardner is the chairman of Serco. That's Serco North America. Rupert Soames is the CEO of Serco Group.
Serco Group, the chairman of Serco Group is Roy Gardner.
Ah, okay. So he's the CEO. There's a chairman and there's a CEO separately.
Yeah, they're separate. Rupert Soames is the chief executive officer. He took over from Christopher Hyman after Hyman resigned in or as a result of or as a deflection of the prisoner escort scandal.
Now, why would he do that if there was no evidence that there was a scandal?
Because internally what we knew is there was a scandal, there was a fraud, right? The City of London police were called in as opposed to the Metropolitan Police.
Just to make it go away.
Because the City of London jurisdiction, so they couldn't have investigated those frauds. Right? Because their reach does not extend beyond the square mile.
Right. So again, it's another one of these political puppet shows for the public to keep everyone satisfied that something's happening when in fact they're just brushing a scandal under the carpet.
Yeah, by exactly the same token, after 9/11 there was what's known as the Amerithrax attacks.
Right.
You have Robert Mueller as the FBI director, who should have sent an FBI team to Porton Down in the United Kingdom, which specializes or is a laboratory that has stocks of the Ames strain of the bacteria, the anthrax bacteria. Those systems were weaponized. That is to say, the anthrax was mixed with what is known as sabotage spore powder, which I think is derived from a Degussa invention for pyrotechnic silica powder, which is a very fine powder that increases the dispersivity of the anthrax, because anthrax is a very heavy clumping bacteria that gets in the ground, but it doesn't blow around, whereas these people wanted to weaponize it. So they mixed it with sabotage spore powder, put it in the envelopes, and mailed it to various targets, mainly, I think, in the mainstream media, and Senators Daschle and Leahy, I think. Yeah. And that strictly to intimidate the media and the Senate, basically, do not talk about 9/11 as a domestic conspiracy, right? Continue to focus the public on Osama bin Laden. But where the hell would Osama bin Laden get access to sabotage spore powder to mixed with a very rare strain of anthrax bacteria? So basically, I think Mueller sabotaged that investigation, and he should be held to account. They hounded a guy called Bruce Irwin, or maybe that's not quite the right, Bruce Irwin, who committed suicide, right? I think he was at the US military infectious diseases. That's not quite the right name. So he was set up, I think, as the patsy. But what should have happened is the FBI team should have flown to Boscombe Down, which is adjacent to Salisbury, near where Portendown is. Boscombe Down is operated by Kinetic. Right?
Bruce Edwards
so if you want this,
Ivins, it looks like.
Bruce Irwin, I think it was.
Ivins.
He was a research. Sorry?
Ivins. I-V-I-N-S.
He committed suicide. He was hounded to death by the FBI. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
What Mueller knows about it should be up before the courts. He's a disgrace to his badge and his profession. Over to you.
Absolutely. And that's not the only thing that he's done. He suppressed the investigation of 9/11 itself, and I think he's now very involved in trying to impeach President Trump. Obviously, he headed up this investigation, and as soon as William Barr came in, there was this sort of major shift. We've heard, of course, that Mueller has refused to testify before Congress. It's amazing the gyrations that these long-standing members of the U.S. government are going through to try to prevent Donald Trump from moving forward with his agenda. And I think some of the things that you and I talk about may be at the root of that motivation.
Well, I think you're right. Again, going back to 110 livery companies, some old and some new, if you wanted to put on the 9/11 attack and you wanted to find the right kind of skill set to put on the different kinds of tasks that need to be synchronized and coordinated, from writing the script to tracking the targets to setting up the cameras to get the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history, for the teams to go in and split the data between the various groups such that the FBI can't solve the crime because they don't have the timestamp data. And then the spoliation team, well, you have the worshipper company of environmental cleaners, right? You have the worshipper company of firefighters. You have the worshipper company of information technologists that would have the kind of skills that would make little David Swigert blush, because there are people who can hack the hackers. I mean, So Swigert and his cronies, they have a very limited skill set. I mean, you and I have talked about this fellow Kevin Marsden, and I really apologize if I've hurt his feelings. I didn't realize he had a medical condition, but I should have obviously guessed. He carries some very interesting books, I think, in his very luxurious and well-equipped library. So he's an interesting guy. I think he's a Cockney. I'm not very good with accents. I think he's an ex-soldier. I think he has PTSD. That's kind of by the by. But he in particular would be a classic example, I think, of an AI wizard who's been programmed to investigate whether or not I have a degree, right? Well, he spent weeks on that. I think he's got a bit bored now. But I went to Cambridge University. I did a 3-year engineering course in 2 years. My college, Queen's College, Cambridge, awarded me a scholarship for outstanding academic performance in 2 years because I had passed part 1 of the mechanical sciences tripos. In the 3rd year, I did an elective, which is Principles of Industrial Management, where I think I learned how to deal with people like Christine Marcy. Over to you.
Well, I was going to say, David, I'm not sure if he's a Cockney or just a plain cock, but he's definitely busy putting out stupid information that is intended to trick people. He's directly involved in this whole set of shenanigans having to do with the Washington Post. I've been going back through some of the information. He contacted me over 1 year ago to tell me that you and Field were lying to me. So it seems to me that he was trying to prevent me from utilizing the platform that I've created here on Crowdsource the Truth to further publicize the information that you and Field were looking into, which had a lot to do with Christine Marcy, investigating 9/11, all the things that you and I continue to talk about. And he's shifted from your lying to me to just trying to shut down the whole operation, calling the Washington Post, accusing me of having changed that article from 1979. He even went as far as telling them to get their legal department involved and to contact the cyber crimes division of the FBI or the local law enforcement or whoever. So this is a guy who's out there who is actively trying, if his efforts were ultimately successful, I would be faced with a lawsuit by the Washington Post or criminal charges from whoever it is that he's trying to get them to contact, when he's not telling us anything that's based in fact. I'm showing everybody yet again, this is a scan of the microfilm, which is a photograph of the newspaper, the Washington Post, as it appeared in 1979, Judy Mann's article referencing Mendenhall's baby. Now, someone who hasn't revealed their identity could be Swigert. Definitely Marsden claims it's not him, but someone on March 25th, 2019, contacted the Washington Post and told them they need to change this word Mendenhall to Marcy's baby, as it now says on the online edition of the Washington Post. And for over a month, I've been contacting people at the Washington Post, and they don't want to talk about it. As a matter of fact, they've actively blocked my phone number from being able to call the Washington Post for simply pointing out the factual matter that their current online edition does not reflect the writings of a now deceased author, which I find amazing. Why would they not just change it back?
Well, I think here you've got, again, a legacy that stretches right back to the livery companies of the City of London, where you have the worshipful company of stationers and newspaper makers. Now, the stationers, that corresponds to the name given to the booksellers outside St. Paul's Cathedral, who had stationery booths, and they would sell original copies of manuscripts and printed books. And they merged, I don't know exactly when, with the newspaper makers. But again, that would be an organization that would be global. So you can take City and Guilds Institute examinations and training programs to become a journalist or work in typesetting or whatever the modern technology is. But if, for example, you want an article rewritten or an old article adjusted or destroyed or removed or obliterated or manipulated, those are the skill sets that you'd need to go to. And remember, not just thanks to Christine Marcy, but to a very large extent, when she bought that first Boeing 727 in, I think, 1984, with money allegedly stolen from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, she created the first mobile prisoner transportation system capable of delivering a hit team or a cleanup crew anywhere in the world within 24 hours, right? So if, for example, the CIA or a private group like, Wackenhut or whatever, Blackwater, decided they wanted someone waterboarded on Diego Garcia, right? You could hire through Christine Marcy a Conair plane and take the torturers and the victims out to Diego Garcia, which is manned by a British police force, but staffed by American service people. And it's like an aircraft carrier with 2,000 miles of ocean around it. So it's probably one of the most well-defended signals intelligence bases anywhere in the world. But I can guarantee you this, Jason, it's got a whole number of fiber optic links to it and from it, meaning that people on that island could be in real-time contact with a command center down below Hawk Hills into the City of London and setting up, for example, the London Underground bombing attack, where, incidentally, going back to the collage, maybe we didn't talk about that for our listeners, but you can see in front of Hawk Hills on the opening collage of Jason's show, there is a bus that's been blown up. Well, interestingly, if my thesis about having a bunker, a command bunker below Hawk Hills for resilience training, the name of the mortuary that was put up the day before the London Underground bombing attack in the Honourable Artillery Grounds, maybe you can get a picture of that. It was a very complex mortuary where they processed the body bits. And it's called,
it was like a tent city resilience mortuary.
But you know what, Jason? No autopsies. So we don't know to this day what kind of explosives were used to kill those people. We do know that a number of eyewitnesses said the floor of the carriages were blown upwards, which suggests to me that the explosives were under the carriages. Right? Mm-hmm. And we do know, that according to Mr. Power, that the bombs went off at the same time and the same location as had been planned for an exercise. Well, that would be an exercise consistent with the function of the Hawk Hills Emergency Preparedness Center, run by Serco. Mm. So what I'm thinking is that Serco and its colleagues in the Worshipful Company of Information Technologies, they set up some tunnels, some data-splitting tunnels for the crime scene, where the timestamps that were used to trigger the bombs were shared with elite faculty for Deadpool betting. The timestamps that would have been needed by the Metropolitan Police to solve the crime were denied the Metropolitan Police, mm-hmm. and the remaining data, which is used to anyone, was fed through to social engineering networks run by people like Swigert and Kevin Marsden and David Rupert Steele or whatever his name is. Well, basically, all of these characters that don't have a day job, but they have hours and hours and hours to confuse investigators who are on a legitimate pursuit of the truth. And that's where I'm appealing again to our supporters to help us, because it's not just dollars and it's not numbers. It's the ability to help us recognize these AI wizards that have been planted into the Internet of Things, to decoy the public away from the truth and away from these horrendous crimes that are going to get more and more serious. Because, for example, Serco is in a joint venture in the United Kingdom with Lockheed Martin and Jacobs Engineering to operate the atomic weapons establishment. There is nothing to prevent Serco making the next attack on Washington a dirty bomb attack or on the port of Charleston. So time is running out, because as we close in, and I think we are with the public behind us, but not yet perhaps in sufficient numbers beside us, these people are going to get desperate. So there's very little time between, I think, their recognition that the gig is up, if you will, and them doing something that will make 911 look like a cakewalk.